Yo, what up? This is Mike Bland. Welcome to the Leadership Fellowship Podcast, where you have to be qualified to have the conversation. Let's go. Yeah, so look, I think the first thing I really want to hit on is the George Floyd piece. There's so much to unpack there, and I think the protests and the rioting and the looting. Look, those all are in the same buckets, but I think they all value a certain space. I think there's aggravation all over. But from how I view it is, this is just a boiling pot, right? And so, I mean, we've all had, crab legs, all had something in the pot, and the water boils over, and there's something all over the stuff all over the stove, and we take the pot off, and then we take the stuff out the pot, but there's still stuff that's burnt in the bottom. That's where we are. I mean, between coronavirus, between racism, the Karens of the world, unemployment. We as a people, African Americans in this country, have now come to this inflection point where enough is enough. And I applaud our white brothers and sisters, our Latino brothers and sisters, our the other brothers and sisters who are standing with us in this piece, because it's a human rights issue, but it's also an African American issue. And look, you're talking about people who've been oppressed in this country for well over 400 years. Who we came over as free labor. Our tag was somebody else's property. And so I think that has been a point where we're now like, we're just not doing this no more. So I applaud everybody who's been out on a fight with us, and who they're learning about what's going on. They're learning about the African American culture. And so a lot of folks liked the culture, but they didn't want the struggle. And so I think when you look back, and so I even challenge, or I want to challenge Board of Educations and people who are educating our children to, I implore you that that's not where African American culture started. It does not start with slavery, not even in this country. Look, even when Christopher Columbus traveled, he had Moors traveling with him, and Moors were looked at as the greatest explorers. They're looked at as the greatest astrologers. They knew how to survey land. They knew where to go. They knew geometry. They knew arithmetic. And so the value of African Americans was seen as early, this sounds cliche, as 1492. But even go further back in Napoleon, and when some of the quote-unquote great philosophers, Galileo Galilei, would go to Timbuktu to learn from African Americans. So when now we fast forward to where we are now, we're like, how are we still being shot dead in the street? And we've been yelling, I can't breathe, for over a decade now. And so I guess I'm curious to find out, why is it now that other cultures or our white brothers and sisters are now trying to figure out, how did we get here? Why this is so bad? What was different between that and Trayvon Martin? What was different between that and anybody who's been killed during the process in this country? So that's why I really want to open up this dialogue, because I'm confused, because what we saw was nothing different that's already been happening. Man, the urban element. You know what's so crazy is we talked about the urban element growing up, and I remember playing Shore Regional Pop Warner football. And our coaching is telling us that these kids in Shore Regional that lived in West Long Branch did not like us, and because they lived in their fancy houses and their parents drove their fancy cars and they played for a great program. But we tried to figure out, they're so close. Why are they so different? And so, I remember one of my Pop Warner coaches telling me there was this thing called the urban element, where their parents wanted to be segregated from the Long Branch schools because it was this, as we like to claim it, this melting pot. And so when you look at the problems that we have in 2020, they were systemically fighting this issue in the 60s and 70s when Shore Regional came around. So I even take it a step further than that. I mean, one of the biggest Ku Klux Klan marches in New Jersey. It happened right here in Long Branch, New Jersey. And so to talk about the valuable experience of privilege, to talk about the urban element where I want to select what I want from the culture, it's tough. And that's something that, we as African Americans in Long Branch have had to embark on as young kids. We learned that from Ocean. We learned that from Shore Regional. We learned that from Rumson Fairhaven. how folks didn't want to mix their kids with our culture. And look, I welcome the pushback, but that was what we were taught, and we were taught that from our white coaches, not our black coaches, that was not welcomed. And so again, welcoming in what the urban element means. The lack of education resources that left when they left, the lack of diversity that left when they left. And so the further redlining. There was this joke back in the day when we were kids that if you were white, you made a left out of the high school. If you were black, you made a right out of the high school. And that's so true. And that's the same way today. I look at some white kids when they come out, they make a left, they live on that side. And they make a right, they live on the other side of the tracks. And so if we really want to talk about diversifying our community, let's talk about how we open all that up together and delineate from this urban element process. So one of the things that I'm having to find a hard time is why does the oppressor need to be educated on the issues? But I'm reminded by a few of my friends that you don't know what you don't know. Or is it to me, are you naive to what you don't know? Oh, I didn't have to learn it. We didn't have to talk about racism. We didn't have to talk about privilege. We didn't have to talk about selection. We didn't have to talk about affirmative action. But let's talk about it. And I think those should be conversations that are had, and why these laws need to be enacted, because of the Jim Crow laws, because of the Voting Rights Act that gets voted on every year and that gets shot down by our Republican counterparts. And so I think it's important to understand, are we to educate the oppressor when they oppressed us and they knew what they wanted to strip us of? Or are we now at an inflection point where they say, we know what what we were trying to strip African Americans of, and let's restore that back to good faith. And I think one of the messages that I would want to convey is that a long time black folk in this country have learned how to survive and not how to live. But we've seen our white counterparts and even some of our Latino counterparts live. And so for us, we are saying, why do we have to learn how to survive? And then now you're saying, well, educate me on what's wrong. You know what's wrong. You know you're getting into better schools. You know you have access to better schools. You know you have better access to environmental communities. That's called gerrymandering, right? Let's move all the black folks in the middle. Let's move all the white folks out. Better, they have cleaner air. They're by lakes. They're by oceans. And let's keep all the black folks in the middle with all the small lapped up over top of each other and housing projects to small apartments. So I would love to sit and educate further than that and talk about Jim Crow and why the Jim Crow laws were enacted. And so again, this goes back from slavery to Reconstruction, and which was one of the most fruitful periods to be African American in this country. Where you talk about Tulsa, Oklahoma, where that was Black Wall Street. Nobody wants to, everybody is outraged that they're rioting and they're burning down buildings. But I wonder how many schools teach about the burning down of Black Wall Street or the bombing in Philly in 1984. And so that was done to us, or the schools and the churches and the homes. And the lynchings that the Ku Klux Klan did, and how the Ku Klux Klan has yet to be dismantled by a federal government, but the Black Panther Party, who was seeking to do good, who was taught our federal government that universal pre-K is important, free meals for children, for breakfast and lunch are important, that universal healthcare for black and brown children are important. That's what the Black Panther Party was, and said, we're going to be a vanguard against police brutality. We're going to protect our own communities, but let's dismantle that, and let's not dismantle the domestic terrorists that is the Ku Klux Klan. So I think these are some things that are innate, but I would love to have a deeper conversation on how that's been affected, or how that affects African Americans, even me as a young age, even my nephew at 3 years old, who was screaming Black Lives Matter, and that collective impulse that has had on his life. Let me first start this segment, Protest of Progress, with a huge shout out to the folks who are out there protesting against the systemic issues that have plagued our country for centuries. In Long Branch, in Asbury, in Newark, in Jersey City, in Camden, in London, in Ireland, in Brazil, in Manchester, folks all over the country who have seen the oppression that black and brown folks have faced from this country. But I think what I wouldn't even say confused about, and some folks want to call me up, but I'd welcome the conversation. Let's now move beyond protest and demand progress. And so I think the one thing that I value out of the process of the process out of the protest is that this no longer feels like a moment, it feels like a movement. And that is one of the things that I'm so inspired by. I can put down the TV every day, and for now 10 days straight, brothers and sisters are protesting across the world about the inequities that have happened to black folk, about the folks being killed. And that gives me hope. And to anybody that doesn't believe, hope is a strategy. But to me, what are we asking for? How are we holding our local law-abiding officials accountable? How are we holding our city councils, our mayors, our county prosecutors, our judges, our DAs? How are we holding them accountable? And I tell you, to me, that's why I say our progress is at the voting booth. But everybody thinks I'm talking about Joe Biden. No, I'm talking about you need to go vote and figure out who runs your city council. You need to go find out who your county clerk is. You need to go find out who your mayor is, because it's inevitably important that these folks make core decisions on your livelihood every day. Your state legislature, you can put the pressure, and we can march in Trenton and hold protests every day until they change an excessive force law. That if a cop uses excessive force, they no longer can use the lawyer that's used by them, that is afforded them by the union. You could also go a step further and say it's time for us to teach black history. And I've mentioned this before, black history into our schools and why that's important. And not start with slavery. I even laugh and say, you know what? You want to play the national anthem? How about after the national anthem or before the national anthem, you play the black national anthem? Because those words have so much meaning and so much magnitude to our culture, but it also tells us the culture of this country. And so I'm trying to figure out what is our ask. And so, it's easy for, folks, for cops and National Guard and folks who like to kneel and elected officials to kneel. But now I need to see you write legislation that is meaningful for people of color, write legislation that holds police accountable, that holds elected officials accountable, and that honestly makes us believe that we are part of this human race and not just a worker bee. So I'm excited to talk about the tools of progress that we need and the difference of the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, Independent Party, Green Party, Libertarian Party, and what their role is in this process. So one of the biggest things today, one of the biggest things that has come to light, that's come to surface, is brother Drew Brees, and I laugh because I've always admired his game. I'm a short brother. I played the game, college football, high school football, well undersized, and overperformed, and so I look at Drew Brees and say, did he miss his mark? He came out the other day and said that he would never, respect or would never agree with somebody who was disrespecting the flag. And I think he completely missed his mark. If you have close to, I would say 3-4 million people around the country who are protesting against an issue that systemically we've seen as wrong in our country, and you're saying you're still reverting to the flag. But I'll go a step even further. What the flag means to Drew Brees is different than what the flag means to you and me. To me, when I see the flag, I see people who are happy about patriotism, and they talk about the land of the free and the brave. And that's nothing to take away the people who have served in our armed services, because I am thankful about that admirable service to our country. But I look at, you're excited and you love this country because of what it does and how it protects you. When I look at the flag, sometimes what I see is how we were brought over here against our will, and even after we thought we had progress, and even after presidents and leaders had tried to shape reforms to give us equal footing in this country, it was pushed back. And so when I look at that flag, I'm not always proud, I'm not always happy, and I'm not always ready to put my hand over my heart, because quite frankly, I feel like if that flag is an example of our country, that and is supposed to be glorified in a wraparound service, I don't feel that way, because it's not felt that way. I look at leaders like LeBron James, Muhammad Ali, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I look at coaches like Ryan Day. I look at coaches like coaches in the NFL. I look at Pop. Pop, the coach from the San Antonio Spurs, Steve Kerr, who have embraced this, but have embraced this for years and knew things were wrong and spoke out about injustice. And so I think he missed his mark. And I'll tell you, it would be hard for me to line up in a locker room and support that brother and go to war. When you get in the space with football. You're lining up. It's a gladiator sport, and you're brothers in arms. And the last thing he would make me feel like, as a person of color, that I was not a brother in arms. And I don't know if I could catch a ball with him. I don't know if I could support him because, you want me to fight for you and what you believe in, but you completely miss. It's like everybody else in the room was talking about the teacher was wrong, but no, you thought she was right because she showed up and her name was teacher. So. To me, I feel like Drew Brees missed his mark. I think it's offensive. I think it's going to be a stain on his legacy. I really do. And quite frankly, I hope he gets the Kaepernick treatment, because you have brothers and you have owners now and other players around the league who are now saying that Kaepernick was treated wrong and we owe so much to his debt. Yeah, so it's one of the things that's been brought to my attention for this past election. A lot of people say, "Oh, I don't like Joe Biden. I don't like this. I don't like that." He's so old and he's so this, or the lesser of two evils. Look, I think that we need to identify what our call is, and that this brother, Joe Biden, he stood by Barack Obama what nobody else did. He supported him during his presidency, and this is not just a blanket statement to say Barack Obama was our savior. He was the first African American president. So what does it mean to have a person that is not a person of color to support you? And to walk with you in the hallowed halls of D.C. and the support legislation that you try to get passed. It's so important. But I think it's important for us to identify in the black community what we expect from Joe Biden, particularly now that we have the George Floyd case. And so we're demanding real civil rights legislation. We're demanding real social justice reform, climate reform. We're looking for somebody to address the inequities in housing and in education. I know that's a lot for one person to take on, particularly in 4 years. But look, I think for everything that we've given to this country, it's time for this country to give back to us what's owed. And I'm not even talking about reparations. I'm talking about what's just right as a human right. They have this thing that's called the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and it says, I am endowed by my Creator of these inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so if you tell me I've been given life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I would tell you you're a fool. So I'm looking for a leader, and we should be looking for a leader who's going to fulfill that dream of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And we should hold them accountable, just like we hold any other elected officials accountable. And let me come to this point. Just because you're black does not mean we should elect you. Because a lot of times we're finding that black elected officials aren't doing what's right for their communities. And so we a lot of times we put you there. We put you over the top. And so, it's important that you talk about public labor agreements and what that does to communities of color and how we employ other people of color when we have public labor agreements. Some folks say they're bad, and I can go back and forth for days, but I just tell folks that's just small things like that on a local level are important. And I think the last thing that I'll say to that point is that nobody's coming to save us. Nobody's coming to save black people. Joe Biden is not our savior. He's a piece to the puzzle. And so the larger pieces to the puzzle is how we organize, mobilize, and energize around voting, around economic capital. And how do we build that economic capital? Putting our dollars back in our community, not be so fast to spend it on Amazon. Jeff Bezos is a trillionaire. They said he's going to arrive as the first trillionaire that we've ever had. And so we're still looking at black billionaires in single digits. And so it's time for us to think about how do we trade amongst ourselves and our communities. But I think it's important that we need to hold Joe Biden accountable. He said he was going to have a woman vice president. That woman vice president should be a person of color. He said he was going to put African-American women on the Supreme Court. I think he should. I think that's well overdue. It's something that I wish Barack Obama did. I believe his cabinet should reflect that. Our major issues should be represented by people of color in his administration. The person that's overseeing HUD should be a person of color. Maybe even the person of Homeland Security, because we're threatened by the homeland. So the person who needs to protect the homeland should be a person of color. So I think there's so many systemic issues that we have, and I think that I think he's qualified for us to believe in. But we need to be able to be in a space that we can. It's not about his energy. It's not about the lesser of two evils. It's about who's going to get the job done and who has a proven track record for the black community. Yo, thank you so much for joining the Leadership Fellowship podcast with us. This is Mike Bland. I'm signing off, but asking you to continue to support black business, asking you to continue to support us and be brothers and sisters in the struggle as we move towards progress. But this is for you. This is your voice. Feel free to hit me out, email me, or reach out to me at Politico_Bland on Twitter. Let us know how you feel. Looking forward to continue this conversation. And remember, You're not qualified to have this conversation. You're not going to be here to have this conversation. I'm out.